I just want to say for anybody out there who's thinking to themselves, I need to learn JavaScript. I need to like learn React. I need to learn web servers. I need to learn all that stuff in order to be a real developer. That's just not true anymore.
So today I spoke with David Coletta, who is building a web app using Softr, and leveraging his coding background, he has superpowered that web app. We had a great chat and we touch on no code and whether it spells the end for developers. Hope you enjoyed and excited to introduce you to David and the app that he's building.
No code. Oh yeah, yeah. No, 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 no code.
So nice to meet you, David. You might introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what led you to Softr and no code and whatever else you'd like to add in.
Sure. So my name's David Coletta. I lived in Boston, Massachusetts. I was a software engineer for most of my career, about 35 years, the last 10 or so at Adobe. And did a lot of work building sites from the ground up with code, first on the server side, and then later on, as it became possible to build single page apps in JavaScript, I started building them all in JavaScript using things like React. And I quit that job a couple of years ago to do more human focused work. And I do a lot of different kinds of projects now. But I'm still a builder at heart. And so in other projects that I'm doing, I often need to build a website. And the way I actually found Softr was really interesting because first I found Airtable and I started accumulating a lot of content in Airtable. And over time, I started to realize, I'd really love to be able to publish this content online. And I thought, surely Airtable has some kind of web publisher built into it, but it doesn't. Um, it's really interesting. We can talk about why that is, but I started looking for tools out there that could build a website dynamically off of data in an Airtable database. And eventually I happened on Softr. And actually the first time I found Softr, I basically dismissed it out of hand because it just seemed like it was too expensive. But um, then I came back because there really isn't anything else out there that compares to it. And I started, well, what can I do with the free plan of Softr? And at that time I was still on the free plan of Airtable as well.
Mm.
And I pretty quickly discovered that with the free plan of Softr and the free plan of Airtable, you can build a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. All right, it's even if you're just at the point of just building out the idea or the prototype before maybe going live when you have something. So it's really, I had a very similar journey. Using Airtable quite a lot. I run a business here in Ireland, so I was using it as kind of the operations center for my business here, and it got me thinking. Well, if I could actually just share snippets of this either through a client portal or even an internal portal, or even just as a full-blown web page, like I said, and Softr and Pori and mini extensions were some of the sort of early front runners. And I think it was at the point that Softr got user accounts and user authentication that I kind of just jumped in on Softr. And I mean, I'm delighted I have. As I completely agree with you, it's by far and away the best in the space. So yeah, it's great. And it's really interesting to see with someone with your coding background, and it's really interesting to see the different walks of life that are kind of coalescing or coming together in and around this sort of no code movement that's going on. And there's definitely, I don't know what you think, but I feel it's kind of bridging that gap between no coders, people that maybe don't have the background in tech, but maybe have a similar way of seeing things or want to be able to build things, and coders who have all of the experience and know all of the pain points in terms of being a coder and are just seeing efficiencies and seeing no code as something that they can add on as something to maybe speed up large parts of the process. But maybe I'm wrong there. Like what's your thought in terms of being a coder and where no code fits for you and why you would choose that over building something from scratch?
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox. I think a lot about that. I mean, the bottom line is I like to build things. I'm pretty agnostic about the tools as long as they're fun to use and productive. And I kind of feel like the world has had enough people like putting their heads down and writing thousands of lines of code just to power one website.
Sure.
And I'm as happy as the next person to use a tool that lets me, create a site that has logins and like Google sign in hooked up and data backing it and forms and all the other features. If I can do that in like half an hour, with Softr instead of days and days of work with writing code, then that frees me up to focus on other things.
Absolutely.
As for being a coder, I mean, my general tendency, if something doesn't work quite the way I want it in Softr, is to think, well, how can I hack this with JavaScript? In
Sure.
fact, Softr does provide a lot of places where you can insert JavaScript to adjust the way things work, if you don't mind looking under the hood.
Yeah.
One of the problems with that, though, is that it's actually it's a bit of a paradox, because the whole point of Softr is you shouldn't have to write code in order to get what you want done.
Mm.
And anytime somebody comes up with a hack that involves injecting some JavaScript, it kind of lets them off the hook.
Mm.
Like, all right, I don't have to build an easy way to do this.
Yeah.
Somebody else has figured out a way to insert some JavaScript. So
Yeah.
that's a really tough balance. On the
Yeah.
one hand, you want those workarounds so that you can get your product out the door.
Yeah.
You don't want them to become old and
The default.
tired. You want
Yeah.
Softr to then say, oh, okay, clearly there's a need here.
Yeah.
Some users prototyped it with JavaScript. We got
Yeah.
to bring that into the platform.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm really, really interested in like getting that loop going.
That's a really good point. It's really, really interesting. Never really thought of it from that point of view, in terms of suddenly these hacks or these workarounds or these JavaScript snippets, they actually become now part of the infrastructure, and it's becoming almost like a community built software platform, so that's really cool. And I think that leads us nicely into, well, it sounds like you've probably built more than a hack. It sounds like you've built a fully functioning, I suppose, component, or if you want to call it that, or a custom block that I suppose no coders might be able to benefit from. And do you want to tell us a little bit about that, and what led you to this point, and what led you to actually building out that particular solution?
Sure. So I was noticing that when you're building Airtable related content in Softr, where the data is coming from Airtable, or maybe you're using a form to enter data into Airtable, which then gets displayed, that works great. But the underlying limitation there is that anything that happens in Airtable has to be the result of something a user did, like either going to a page, or maybe sending a form. But sometimes what you really want is something to happen in Airtable that is not the result of an Airtable feature in Softr, but it's the result of just something else that happens. Like it could be page load. It could be a user clicking on a button that really has nothing to do with Airtable.
Yeah.
And so what you'd like to be able to do is trigger an Airtable automation with a webhook. And this is a relatively new feature in Airtable. It's still in alpha, but it seems to work pretty reliably.
Yeah.
And the way that you trigger a webhook is a little tricky.
Sure.
There's two big problems that need to get solved in order for this to really work.
Yeah.
So the end goal is you've got some JavaScript in a page, you attach it to, say, a button, and the user clicks on the button, and you want an Airtable automation to run. So the first hurdle you've got to overcome is that the Airtable automation is over at Airtable, right? It's not at Softr. The browser has security features that prevent JavaScript from just making random calls to anywhere on the web.
Okay.
And that's called CORS, which stands for Cross Origin Resource Sharing.
Sure.
Those CORS restrictions mean that unless you essentially create some permissions at the server end, you can't make that webhook call at all. It just won't work. Now, Airtable doesn't have the ability to offer that kind of permission, which is called sending back CORS headers. The typical solution for this is, if you control your own server, you can just put a proxy in your server. That means that in your JavaScript, you make a call to like your app.softr.app.
Sure.
And then Softr proxies that information out to Airtable, and everything works great.
Okay.
But in the no code movement, often we don't control our own server, right?
Yeah.
We're building something in, it's Softr's world. We just live in it.
Yeah.
And so if we want to make that call, we have to have our own proxy. And that's the first big feature that Appspan, which is the name of this thing, addresses. So it's actually a proxy server that securely allows you to make a call to a webhook automation. So in this one,
Okay.
what you do is you make a call to the proxy server. The proxy server says, do I trust you? Are you, because this is the origin that you said it'd be coming from?
Sure.
And like, is this a key that you previously defined? If
Yeah.
so, turn around and send that off to Airtable.
Okay.
That's the first big feature.
Yeah.
The second problem is that the nature of webhooks is that they're public URLs that anybody on the internet can call. It is possible to attach authorization to them, but typically that's not how webhooks are configured. So it's just the fact that this URL is not available to be seen anywhere, right?
Sure. Theoretically, somebody could come along to a Softr app that's built by somebody, and they can hover over, say, the likes of a button that has a URL link maybe coded into it from the Airtable backend, and they can see at the bottom of their browser the actual snippet, or they could inspect the button and get the URL that way. Only if, 99% of people aren't going to want to do anything with that, but it's just in the, it's not a desirable situation where somebody could, if they wanted to, take that and start firing information just blindly into your app or into your Airtable base, or just causing it's just a bit of a security weakness, I guess. And it's probably best if that isn't exposed as part of, triggering whatever action you want to happen.
Exactly. So that's the second problem that Appspan solves.
Sure.
Because even if Airtable did allow you, from a security perspective, to make webhook calls directly to it, that wouldn't be a good idea. Because your webhook would be sitting right there in the JavaScript.
Yeah. Okay.
So the second thing that Appspan provides is the ability to essentially put your webhook URL in some config that I store for you.
It's like a secret or something, is it? It's something like similar functionality to that.
Right.
Okay.
So instead of calling the webhook directly through this proxy, you call the webhook by name. So you give it a name, whatever you want it to be in your code, and then you call it by name.
Sure.
That means that since nobody else from any other website can make this call, or you can make it from your site.
Sure.
And the webhook is secret and you're only referring it to it by an ID.
Okay.
It's about as secure as this sort of thing can be.
Amazing. Yeah. Sounds really cool. So I know, like, for probably a lot of people watching this channel are probably pure no coders, but I do think there are probably some coders watching as well. I don't know, maybe there are, but what I'm thinking is, do you want to we'll maybe do a demo of the app? Is it at that stage yet? Obviously it sounds like it's quite a complex process that you've done in the background, but it sounds like something that you've done so that maybe, us no coders can actually just utilize the actual Appspan feature and reap the benefits that you've sort of outlined there. But will we jump into a screen share maybe, and we'll have a look and play around with it?
Okay. So I'm going to start sharing with the homepage for Appspan, which of course I built in Softr.
Practice what you preach. Yeah, it looks like a very familiar layout. All right, looks really good though. I like it's just a clean, minimal design, and it looks really good.
So if you're not signed in, I'll prompt you to sign in, but we'll skip that part because that's pretty standard.
Sure.
But you come here, and once you've signed in, you might want to create a webhook. So you click on create a webhook. And actually, let me sit back and just say, let's come up with just a very simple use case, which is,
sure,
you'd like to populate an Airtable. You've got a table in Airtable. You'd like to populate it with records that correspond to users visiting pages on
a good use case.
Very simple, like the lowest rent analytics you can possibly imagine.
Exactly.
You want the data yourself. You don't want to have to send it off to Google Analytics or anything else. You want to keep it in your system because maybe you have some use for it.
Sure.
Airtable.
And so would that be triggered by effectively, a user, just by virtue of loading a page or by virtue of landing on a page in your app, it might trigger this webhook to create a record in Airtable? Is that the use case?
That's exactly the use case.
Amazing. That sounds really good.
And it's just a very, very simple scenario. So the first thing I do is I'd go ahead and create a webhook. And by the way, I'm using Tally forms in here. I was playing around with Softr forms for a while, but they just didn't give me quite enough usability to make this as friendly as I could think to make it. I'll put a webhook in here and I'll just call it, page loaded.
Okay, so this is sort of what the user in your app is putting in so they can identify, because presumably over time, as you're building an app, you're going to have a number of these webhooks, and it's just probably to put in something that is meaningful to you, that you know when you're looking at a list of say 10, 20, 30, you know what each one is and what each one is doing, you know?
Exactly. So then I'll hit next. And this is the part this is really intense because um, I'll just pause to say, creating a webhook is a process where you have to go back and forth with Airtable.
Yes.
Because
Yep.
in Airtable, when you create the incoming webhook,
Yeah.
you actually have to call that webhook before
To test it. Yeah.
finish creating it.
Sure.
So I've added a little bit of wizardry to that. So
Brilliant.
here we are now, and it says, if you don't have your URL already, go get it. So you open up Airtable, start
Okay.
reading automation,
Yeah.
see all, pick webhook, and then come back to this page. So I'll just demo that quickly right now.
Cool.
So I'll go into a database, and I will, in automations, I'll create an automation. Notice that webhooks as an alpha feature, they don't actually appear in the main list. So you see all, and then here it is. So it's hiding. All right. So here I am. I'm in the middle of creating a webhook, but I've already got the URL here. So all I have to do is copy it and then go back to Appspan and paste it.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of error checking here. So if you manage to put something in that doesn't look like an Airtable webhook URL.
Oh, well, it does a bit of a validation check on it.
Gotcha.
And was that a feature inside of Tally, or did you have to do some sort of configuration there?
Tally actually has some pretty sophisticated validation logic that you can create. So you can do things like say, this has to be a URL, or you can say this has to start with a string or end with a string or contain a string in it. So it makes it pretty easy. Since all Airtable webhooks start with hooks.airtable.com, like that, I can at least look for that. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better than nothing.
Definitely, absolutely.
So great. And by the way, you notice the note, you have to just leave that Airtable webhook creation process right
Sure.
where it is. You can't. You can't.
So it's waiting for basically some sort of test to call it in the background, and it'll only sort of finalize or allow you to actually configure the rest of the automation once that part has been done. Is that right?
Exactly. So now I can put this in some Softr app, and I'll put this one in my playground app, which is called David's Playground Softr.app. Okay. And notice there's a little validation here to make sure that the URL is formatted properly as well. And this, by the way, is the point where by specifying this, you're basically saying this webhook can only be called from a website that lives at davidsplayground.softr.app.
Okay.
That's the part that protects your webhook from being called by anybody anywhere on the internet.
Brilliant. Really cool.
Okay. Now, some of the most basic things you want to be able to send are the user's email address, the user's full name, the URL of the current page. So I've made that stuff really, really easy to do.
That's amazing. So is that will pull it from the Softr backend, is that right? Or is it pulling it from the user table inside of your Airtable base?
It's actually going to pull it from the web page.
From the web page, okay.
Because this is going to end up handing you a little snippet of JavaScript to put in your app.
Okay, right.
Okay, so we'll do the URL of the current page and the user's email address. And I'll just show, if you wanted to, you could also put in some custom data. Like you could put in something like time, which by the way, is not one of the default properties because you can just pull it out of the Airtable record, but you could put in time and then you could put in some code like new date. And then that would pass the time along as a custom property, but we're not going to do it. So go ahead and submit this. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is, this is sort of getting the user ready.
Sure, yeah.
We're going to go back to that Airtable automation.
Yeah.
And we're going to send some data at it.
Okay.
And see what happens. So I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's see how it goes.
So now I'm going to show you, these are the webhooks that have already been created, but we just created this page loaded one.
Page loaded one there. Yeah, perfect.
So I'll hit test. And now this is going to take us to a page that actually makes the call to Airtable.
Okay.
All right. And you can see it happened very fast. We made
Yeah.
the call and we got back a successful response from Airtable, which means Airtable just received some data from us.
Okay.
We'll go back over to our automation and we'll hit, well, oh, look, we don't even have to do test trigger for
It's caught it.
It already picked it up. So
Okay.
in Airtable, we'll go look at what did we get? Okay. We got two things. We got email and we got current URL. And what do you know? Those were the things we asked for.
You'd asked for it to pass with it. Looks really good.
So we're now pretty confident that this is right. But the
Sure.
next thing we're going to do is we're going to add an action. So it could be an action like create record, right? So I'll just set this up to my users table, and then I'll choose fields here, right? So in my, sorry, not users table, that's not right. The log table.
Sure. Yeah.
Log table, I will say, all right, I want to map username to the data that came in on the webhook, which is email.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to map URL to the current URL.
Very nice.
And so I'll generate a preview for that. It's not really that helpful, but it does get you a step closer to.
Yeah. And this is relatively new in Airtable as well, being able to actually generate a preview to see what it would do without actually creating the record, say in your Airtable base at the testing stage of your automation. So looked like that worked really well.
Yep. So this automation's actually done.
Sure.
Now, we'll go back to Appspan
Mm-hmm.
and now let's look down here on this page and see, here's some script and we need to put this script into our app.
Mm-hmm.
So this script, you copy and paste this and you put it into the code inside header.
Sure.
Either a single page, if this is just something you want to run on one page.
Yeah.
Put it at the site level.
Okay.
Now,
and so if you're putting it at the site level, am I right in saying you'd go into the settings in the Softr Studio, and inside of settings, there's a custom code feature, and you would effectively just paste it in there.
So I'll just go into custom code,
Sure.
code inside header. Oops. Helps if you copy it.
Yeah.
So copy and then paste. And this script is not particularly beautifully formatted, but you can go in and format it if you really want to.
Okay, I think as long as it works, I think we'll all be we're all delighted with that, you know.
And then the other script you put somewhere. This is the script that actually makes the call. The previous script sets up a function that when you call it sends the webhook, but this is the one where you need to actually choose where to put it. And a really sensible place for this function would actually be in the code inside foot.
Okay.
Right. So now we're all set to publish this.
Sure.
And I'm not actually gonna go through the process of publishing it, but I'm just going to show you what a table might look like.
Sure.
So like in this database, I have a log here of pages that are loaded. And I've actually filled this out with a little more data than is in that webhook, but this is for the sake of demonstration.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a record here of an action, which is a page load, who did it, the name of the person who did it, the timestamp, which is just a formula that shows created time.
Perfect. Yeah.
This record is created so close to the call to the web automation, there's no point in sending that data. And then the URL of the page you are on.
Very nice. So that looks amazing. And I suppose if I was trying to trigger, say it wasn't the page load action, say it was actually trying to trigger a webhook from, say, a button, whether it's on a list block or whether it's on a list details block inside of the Softr app, would you need to, what way would you link a button to effectively the webhook, if that makes sense?
Right. So there is no feature in Softr right now which lets you essentially hook up a custom code block
to
an action on a button. That
Okay.
that seems like a kind of an obvious thing that they might add at some point, right?
Sure.
And say like that a button does something like send data to Airtable or Zapier,
Sure.
Integromat or whatever.
Yeah.
But so with the way that I have been doing this so far is in a custom code block that
Sure.
runs at the end of the page. I'll use jQuery to like select all the buttons on the page,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
attach a JavaScript function to them that listens for a click on that button.
Okay.
And in that code, I'll paste the webhook call.
Okay. And if somebody in the Appspan app was attempting to configure that, would the Appspan generate that code snippet or that jQuery, or is that sort of down the line or phase 2, or what way are you thinking about that?
Well, that's a great question because it kind of leads to where to go from here with what I've built so far. What I
Sure.
built is sort of what I call a minimum viable product, right?
Brilliant.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's just enough to get you going.
Yes.
There's so much more that can be done with it. So one of the things that I'd like to do next is I'd
Sure.
like to get to this to the point where the only thing you have to do to use this is put one snippet of JavaScript in one place in your website.
Mm.
Then everything else is actually configured through the Appspan app. So you don't have to essentially
Yeah.
carry
That would be
JavaScript.
incredible. Yeah, that'd be amazing. It'd be like having an interface over here in Appspan to configure. And funnily enough, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the video, in terms of, well, Softr is really becoming a community built software platform, and you could certainly see Appspan being a huge add-in or component in terms of being able to add extra security, extra actions, extra things that functionality that can be triggered not only from clicks, as you said, like even just from page loads or from maybe potentially other types of actions or events down the line, so that looks really, really cool. So I mean, obviously, you're at MVP point, what you've mentioned. Can people currently sign up to Appspan if they would like to, and can they start using it?
Sure. I'm actually eager for some new users because every time somebody onboards to Appspan, I learn a lot.
Sure.
Because I find out where the process needs to be a little easier.
Sure.
And I let that guide what I do next.
Yeah.
And also I discover new uses for it because people say, oh, I want to use it for like vote buttons. Like,
Yes.
like our buddy Joachim, how do you say it? Joachim.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I think I've said it in a video before. Joachim, I think so, but sure, he can correct us if we're wrong.
He wants to use it for the upvote, downvote feature in the unlock-softr.com app that he's building, which is a place where we're keeping track of snippets of code that are used for Softr.
And it looks really cool. Yeah.
So yes, people can definitely use it, but right now, if you want to use it, you have to have at least a very basic comfort level with JavaScript. You don't have to be able to write code, but you have to be able to copy and paste code at least.
Sure, yeah. And I think that's what, what a lot of these no-code tools I find as a pure no-coder is doing is without us knowing that we're doing it, we're almost learning the concepts of code just through a different interface. And I think what you've demonstrated there today, David, definitely looks very user-friendly, particularly for even an MVP type build in terms of being able to just know exactly where to copy and paste the snippets, and I can see you had it working there instantly. So I mean, that's great. I also love that it looks like you've really, well, this is possibly from years of experience in building things, but the whole MVP approach, the last video that we released on the channel here was really all about that. It's all about the start and then learn type approach to things, and it really looks like you are building this out in a really exciting way, that way, in terms of what's the point of building something if it's if it's not solving, or if it's not helping people, or if it's not actually what they want. So yeah, really excited to see. You know, I can already imagine a million possibilities with the likes of an Appspan in the future, and how it could enhance a Softr app. So really excited to see where that goes. I'm definitely going to sign up, and I'm going to try and play around with it, and I will of course give you feedback and let you know what I would love to be able to do with this. And you can obviously start building a feature request list of your own for your own app type thing, and see where that goes. Do you see that maybe Appspan could maybe start to build out components or something like that, in terms of a universal, say, like button component that might fit into the app somehow? Or is that just way off? For, you know, is that just too far down the line?
Oh, I don't think it's too far at all, but I had never thought of that before. But if I understand what you're suggesting, it would be another feature in Appspan where you could go through a wizard, create an automation, and generate something that was like a whole generic component that you could paste into anything, not just software.
Exactly, something like that. Yeah,
Universal like button. I think
exactly.
that's a great idea. I should go prototype that.
You know, that kind of thing. But that's where it's going. You know, I suppose in terms of the Airtable webhooks, what I've been doing as a sort of hacky no coder workaround has been actually calling a make or an Integramat webhook from a Softr form, and that's going into the Integramat backend, which is then doing an API call module trigger to call the webhook. But that in itself means that you've got this other step. It can be a bit slower. You've got you know, you've got an intermediary software in between. But yeah, that's really all. So I mean, where else can people find you, David? If they want to get in touch, or if they want to contact you, or ask you questions on Appspan or anything like that?
Oh, you know, well, a great place to go is the Slack community on Softr, which you can get to by just going to softr.io and looking at the bottom of the page where there's a link to Slack. But I'll put an about page on the Appspan website. It doesn't have one right now, but I'll put one in today.
Brilliant.
It'll be there by the time you publish this video.
All right. Well, look, yeah, that was brilliant, David. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for showing us Appspan, and would love to have you on again in the future for an update, or for look at maybe something else you're building. And you know, I think definitely the exciting part of the no code world is probably this bridging of the gap between coders, no coders, low coders, and everybody being able to start to realize or build out whatever ideas and projects they have. So look, yeah, great to meet you. Any last words of wisdom you'd like to leave for the video?
I just want to say, for anybody out there who's thinking to themselves, I need to learn JavaScript. I need to learn React. I need to learn web servers. I need to learn all that stuff in order to be a real developer. That's just not true anymore. Real developers are the ones who get stuff done. And if the right tool is something like Softr, you should go for it.
It's funny because you find a lot of content out there, and you know, and it's kind of like, is it trying to evoke fear inside of coders that no code is going to be, or no code plus automation and all of these various movements is going to spell the end for the traditional coder or developer, which, I mean, in my mind, I think that's completely ridiculous. I don't think that is a possibility. What I think it's just going to do, as you've said, is it's actually just going to empower coders to move faster, to cut out a lot of the inefficient part of having to code stuff from scratch. And actually, as you said at the beginning of the video as well, to hone in on the more important aspects of the build, which is actually, well, the product or the solution that you're solving with what you're building, you know? Right.
So, I mean, if you just really like to write mountains of code, then that could be a risky place to be in the future. But if you want to hop up a level of abstraction, let Softr worry about the basics, and you work on the stuff that Softr can't do, then the sky's the limit.